In this video, we will be finishing up Chapter 6. In this last section, Role of Prices, we will talk about what roles do prices play in a free market economy. So before we get started, when it comes to this roles, a couple of questions for you to think about here. Should stores be allowed to price gouge after a natural disaster? We recently had a couple of hurricanes that have gone through the U.S., and as a result of that, we've seen prices on certain items have skyrocketed. Should they be allowed to do that? Besides for profit, why else would store price gouge people in need of necessities? Why would they do something like that? Well, thinking about those two questions, it's not really the stores trying to price gouge people. It goes back to the law of demand and supply. We're trying to look for that equilibrium. And what we've covered already in Section 1 and Section 2 is we talked about the relationship between the two. And whenever there's a shortage that's in disequilibrium, and as a result of that, the short fix is to increase the price. So then as a result of that, you're back to equilibrium. So the reason these stores and gasoline stations that have incredible prices, outrageous prices for gasoline, is not necessarily to make profit, but it's there to try to make sure that everyone has some of the resources available to them, trying to make the item or the product or service be able to spread it out more. So when you see these high prices, it's not a matter of the company trying to price gouge. It's a matter of trying to make sure everyone has a little bit rather than nothing. And then the last question, should government ever intervene by implementing rationing on its citizens? And we will look at rationing that has taken place in the U.S. And what rationing basically means is that citizens are limited on the items that they're allowed to purchase. So we'll talk about that in this section. Also question, why does the older generation not throw away leftovers? That question will also look at from history of why the older generation of your grandparents, and if you have any great-grandparents, why are that way? So we'll talk about that. During World War II, we found that we were having certain items and services that were very limited. So as a result of this, the government implemented a program that was deal with rationing. So people were only allowed to purchase a certain amount of certain things here. Here's two newspaper articles from that time. The one on the left is talking about nylons and what to expect there. And then on the other side, it talks about rationing of meats and cooking fats and oils. On that article there, it just talks about using the same oil over and over and over again. So when we cook today, we use the pan, we use the oil, and we're done. We clean it out. Well, back then, you would continue to use the oil over and over and over again until it was just nothing worth using. And then what they'd actually ask you to do is actually bring it in so they could recycle it and be used once again. So let's talk about prices in a free market. Price is the key element to equilibrium. When we did that activity in class where we had buyers and sellers for our paperclip exchange, the number one thing that we use to make business happen in that market is using prices. It is the equilibrium that brings the law of demand and the law of supply together. It solves problems of shortages and surplus. So those disasters that were taking place in the U.S., when there was not enough for everybody, they raised the prices very high, so then it returned to equilibrium. If a product is priced too expensive, you're going to have inventory, like those digital cameras we talked about with the 1.3 megapixels. They had to keep dropping the price to stay with the market. So price serves as a language, as an incentive, as a signal of economic conditions, how things are going. So let's talk about some of these different ways that prices serve. It is a common language for buyers and sellers. When I am operating my business with food, I am able to speak to individuals that may not speak the same language as me, but a matter of just being able to point at the item on the menu, then I know exactly what they want and then how much to charge them. And as a result of that, we're able to do business regardless of their language. So the barrier is removed, and we're able to use prices as a common language between the both of us. Prices are also incentives. What will be the result in action if there's a large demand? Result's going to be a shortage. And action, produce more product. So it's also an indicator to let us know what needs to take place. If there's a great shortage of an amount of items that are out there, well, then there is a response to that. It's an indicator that more of this product needs to be produced. In the short run, the fix is just to raise the prices if there's not enough. But in the long run, it's to produce more product. So tell whether a product is in short supply or readily available. Prices really help give us an idea of what exactly we should do when it comes to creating more inventory or purchasing more or producing less. Now, prices are also play in signals. And what we mean by that is for the law of demand, law of supply is seen in this. For businesses, if the prices are low for the product, it's time to produce something else. The signal is to stop producing this because no one wants it. If the prices on the item are very high, well, that's an indication for suppliers that they need to produce more because this is an item that is in bigger demand. Now, for the consumer, we look at the law of demand, and where it says high prices, buyers will buy before thinking about it. So whenever the price is very high, then for the consumer, they're going to either slow down or stop buying that item altogether. Law of demand again says if the price is higher, the amount of quantity demanded will be lower. Now, for the consumer, if the price is low, that's the green light for the consumer to go out and buy more. Again, law of demand, the price is low, we're going to purchase more quantity demand. So we clearly see in these prices as signals that the law of supply and demand working together. It's finding that middle ground where business can be done. Now, flexibility with prices as well. When there's a supply shock, we have a sudden shortage of a good. So as we talked about already, we would increase the price in order to return to equilibrium. But what if still that's not doing the job? Well, there is sometimes a system known as rationing that's put into place to make sure that everyone gets their fair amount and also there to regulate the price. So during World War II, Japan seized plantations in the Dutch East Indies, which is where we were getting 90% of our raw rubber. As a result of that, since we didn't have that 90% coming in anymore, a rationing program was put into place by FDR, which urged people to donate old tires, raincoats, garden hoses, rubber shoes, whatever they could think of in order to continue to supply our soldiers what was necessary to be able to battle. So rationing, even though prices are still there, rationing is sometimes implemented. We see that this system has been used a couple times in history. It's been used in the UK during World War II. In the US, we actually had an Office of Price Administration, which was responsible for setting the prices and coming up with this system. So no cost to administer prices in a free market distribution system. But in a rationing program, usually you see this program in centrally planned economy, which we looked at in Chapter 2, which means the government has complete control of everything. So what life would look like during that time is you would have a lot of long lines, you'd have unhappy customers, and minimal conveniences. So even if you were wealthy during this time, you could not just go out and purchase whatever you want. You were given a book, which basically had all these tickets in it, and then this ticket book was then used to purchase items. And since everyone was getting the same using this plan, we had a result of long lines, unhappy customers, and minimal conveniences. Now, everyone may have been not happy with it, but the benefit is everyone got food and got shelter. But you did have the long lines, you're not happy about what you're eating, and you're not happy necessarily what you're wearing or where you're living, but you do get to eat and you do have shelter. So the rationing and shortages, that's the program that was implemented during that time. Now, as a result of rationing, when the free market is not allowed to do what it's good at doing, we usually have a black market that comes out of that. So this is where items are sold illegally. No matter what the government controls on price or quantity, and as a result of this, it's a result of the rationing program as a black market. So what was taking place during this time is that a lot of the markets, the butchers, the people that were selling the produce at the markets, they knew that they could sell certain items on the side under the table for a very expensive price. So if there was wealthy customers, maybe the butcher would hold on to some meat, put it on the side, and collect a lot more money on these items. This always happens as a result of rationing. When we find this when it takes place when there's high taxes on certain items. There was a black market actually for cigarettes that was going on in New York. New York's prices for cigarettes were outrageously expensive, so a lot of people were going over the border to New Jersey, which was, I think, a third or half the price, bringing it back into New York and making a profit on it. So whenever you have high taxes on an item where there's rationing taking place, there's always going to be a black market that exists to get these other items that are going on there. Now, the purpose of rationing, is to try to make sure everyone has enough. But as a result of that, our factors of production, our land, labor, and capital, will be used for their most valuable purposes in a free market system. So when these programs are implemented, it's not necessarily, not necessarily being used to its full potential. Plus, the resource owners will sell to the highest bidder when there's a free market. So that free market allows the owner of that factor production to make the best decision with what they have, and then those factors of production will no longer have underutilization, because in a free market, those prices allow things to happen. If we remember in a previous chapter, we talked about a book called Wealth and Nations. In that book, it talks about business prosper, profit by finding what people want and then providing for it. In a free market with prices, there's this efficiency that takes place because we allow the market to decide what should take place. It's not controlled by a rationing program, by a government, but it's by a free market system that allows the consumers and the suppliers to decide on what's produced, on how much, and what it is. And we also see this with workers as well. The harder you work, you're more successful. People want to pay for your work ethic because they know there'll be a better profit margin when it comes to that. So the efficient resource allocation distribution in a free market system is always going to be more efficient than it would be in a rationing program. And the last slide we have here is prices and profit incentive. Now, when you don't have a system that is run properly, when there's rationing, what takes place is sometimes you have a lack of competition. If there is no incentive there, we find that there is no competition. Now, let's talk about some of the negative aspects of having a price and profit incentive in a free market. Well, when there is an item, a product, or service that has less competition, this is known as a monopoly, and as a result of that, the lack of competition results in higher prices. And then remember, we talked about minimum wage, and we also talked about price ceilings when it came to rent control. When there is a line set where it limits competition, we have a result of that. You're going to have worse products that are there. Now, sometimes with the price as well, we have a negative externality. We've talked about that before as well, where there is no statistics or chart or ruler to use for this. Yes, you could have a free market where you have prices and things are going correctly, but what about the pollution that takes place as a result of the item? Or lack of labor laws. If there is no labor laws there, what would people be taken advantage of by not getting paid the proper amount? And then sometimes as well, twisting the information so it's imperfect. So the free market, when it comes to equilibrium and using the prices, it's the best system we have available. It's not the perfect system, but it is probably the best economic system that we have today. So in section 3, we're talking about the role in prices, how it's a language, how it's an indicator, how it's used to make sure that the correct products and services are being offered. So this is the end of section 3.